Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most brutal, beautiful, and absolutely unforgiving workplaces of the medieval world, the glassblower's workshop. Picture this. You're standing in a low-ceilinged stone room where the air shimmers with heat waves so intense they distort your vision. The furnace in the corner glows like a miniature sun, radiating a heat that makes your skin prickle from 15 feet away. The floor is scattered with broken shards that glitter in the firelight, each one sharp enough to slice through your worn leather shoes. Your eyes are already watering from the smoke, and you haven't even picked up a blowpipe yet. This isn't some romantic artisan studio you'd see on a pottery show. This is an industrial hellscape where one wrong move can blind you, burn you, or bankrupt your master. And here's the thing. You probably wouldn't make it through your first shift without either fainting from heat exhaustion or shattering something worth more than your family's annual income. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in Melbourne watching the sun come up? Tokyo winding down your evening? Minnesota buried under 3 feet of snow? I love seeing where this little bedtime community stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Venice, probably, or maybe Bohemia, somewhere in the 13th or 14th century. The exact year doesn't matter much. Glass-blowing workshops operated essentially the same way for about 500 years, which tells you something about how perfected and how brutal the system was. You've been apprenticed to a master glassblower, which means your parents either paid a significant fee or called in a favor, because this is actually a prestigious position. Glass in the medieval period isn't something you pick up at a dollar store. It's a luxury item, almost magical in its properties. Transparent yet solid, fragile yet capable of holding liquid, shapeable yet permanent. Windows made of actual glass are so rare that nobles sometimes take their glass panes with them when they move between estates. A fine Venetian goblet can cost as much as a warhorse. But prestige doesn't mean comfort. Your apprenticeship will last somewhere between 7 and 12 years, and you're starting at the bottom of a very hot, very dangerous ladder. The workshop itself is usually a separate building, isolated from other structures because of the fire risk. These places burn down with alarming regularity. Historians still argue whether the Great Fire of London in 1666 might have been worsened by glassworks in certain districts, though that's much later than our period. The walls are thick stone, the roof is often partially open to vent the tremendous heat, and there are virtually no windows because, ironically, glassblowers work in dim environments. Too much light makes it hard to judge the color and temperature of the glass you're working with. The glow of the molten material is your primary light source. Your workday begins before dawn. Actually, that's misleading. Your workday never really ends because the furnace never goes completely cold. Glass furnaces in the medieval period had to maintain temperatures between 1800 and 2300 degrees Fahrenheit continuously. Let that sink in for a moment. There's no thermostat, no gas line you can turn on and off. This is a massive structure built from special refractory bricks that can withstand the heat, and it's fueled by wood or sometimes charcoal. If the furnace cools down completely, the glass still inside it will solidify into an unusable mass, and you'll lose not just the materials but also the days of work invested in preparing the glass mixture. Plus, getting the furnace back up to temperature takes days and burns through an enormous amount of fuel. So someone has to feed the furnace around the clock. Guess who that someone is? As the newest, lowest-ranking apprentice, you're on night shifts, stoking the fire every couple of hours. This means you essentially live at the workshop. There's usually a small room or even just a corner with some straw where apprentices sleep, and I use the term sleep loosely. You set yourself to wake every 2 hours, stumble to the furnace in the darkness, add fuel, check that the fire is drawing properly, then collapse back onto your pallet. You do this every single night, for years. The heat is genuinely incomprehensible if you've never experienced it. Modern glassblowers work with powerful ventilation systems, heat-resistant gear, and temperature controls. You have none of that. When you approach the furnace opening, called the glory hole, which always gets a chuckle from modern audiences, the radiant heat hits you like a physical wall. Your face feels like it's sunburning in real time. Your eyes dry out instantly. The air you breathe is so hot it makes your throat hurt. Workers often keep buckets of water nearby, not primarily for drinking but to dunk their heads and arms to cool down. Some workshops are built near canals or rivers so workers can periodically jump in, fully clothed, just to survive the shifts. And you're not just standing near this inferno, you're working directly with it, leaning into it, reaching into it with tools. The primary tool is the blowpipe, a hollow iron rod about 4 to 5 feet long. It's heavy, awkward, and after you've been holding it for hours with molten glass on the end, your shoulders and arms scream with fatigue. But before you even get to touch a blowpipe, you're spending months, maybe years, doing the grunt work. You're gathering fuel. You're preparing the raw materials. You're cleaning up the endless broken glass that accumulates. You're learning to recognize when the furnace is at proper temperature just by the color of the interior, a skill that takes ages to develop and is absolutely critical. The glass itself begins as a mixture called frit, a combination of silica, usually sand or crushed quartz, soda ash or potash as a flux to lower the melting point, and lime for stability. Medieval glassmakers didn't understand the chemistry the way we do, but they had perfected the ratios through centuries of trial and error. Different regions had different recipes, and these were guarded jealously. The Venetians, who dominated European glassmaking, developed a formula using a special type of ash from plants grown in coastal Syria, creating their famous cristallo glass that was remarkably clear. Preparing the frit is labor-intensive and, surprise, also dangerous. Silica has to be ground into fine powder, which means you're breathing in tiny particles of what will eventually become glass. There's no mask, no ventilation system. You just breathe it. We'll come back to what that does to your lungs, but for now, just know that every breath at work is slowly killing you. The materials are mixed in large containers, then loaded into the furnace in clay pots called crucibles. These crucibles are works of art themselves. They have to withstand extreme temperature cycling without cracking, and making them is yet another specialized skill. The workshop has a strict hierarchy. At the top is the master, who does the most complex work and deals with clients. Below him are journeymen, qualified craftsmen who can work independently but don't own their own workshops. Then there are the various levels of apprentices. Everyone has a specific role during each piece's creation. Glassblowing isn't a solo activity. It's a carefully choreographed team effort. The gaffer, master craftsman working on a piece, has assistants who gather glass, prepare tools, fetch materials, and help shape the piece. There's a servitor who manages the reheating process, and a bit gatherer who collects the first gather of molten glass on the pipe. Your first real promotion as an apprentice comes when you're trusted to carry tools from the storage area to the workbenches without dropping them. Thrilling, right? But in a workshop where every second counts and where the glass you're working with is cooling and becoming less pliable by the moment, having someone who can anticipate what's needed and place it in the craftsman's hand at exactly the right instant is genuinely valuable. The workspace is organized around the furnace and several other key stations. There's the glory hole for reheating pieces during work, a smaller furnace called a lair for annealing, slowly cooling finished pieces so they don't develop stress fractures, and a flat surface called a marver where hot glass is rolled and shaped. The marver is usually a polished stone or metal surface, and rolling the molten glass on it helps create uniform shapes and smooth surfaces. Watching a master work the marver is hypnotic. The glass glows orange and yellow, and with each roll, It becomes more symmetrical, more refined. But that beauty comes at a cost that's measured in burns, scars, and sheer exhaustion. Your hands develop calluses, but calluses don't really help when you accidentally touch something that's hot enough to melt metal. The tools themselves retain heat. The floor near the furnace is hot enough to cook on. Sparks fly constantly. Bits of molten glass drip and splatter. There's a reason glassblowers traditionally wore thick wool clothing despite working in hellish heat. Wool doesn't ignite as easily as linen when a glob of liquid glass lands on it. It just smolders, which is only slightly better. Medieval workshops didn't have safety equipment beyond maybe a leather apron. No goggles to protect your eyes from the glare. No gloves because you need dexterity. No steel-toed boots. You work in regular clothes and hope you're quick enough to avoid the worst of it. You're not, of course. Everyone in the workshop is covered in burn scars. The master has patches on his arms where the skin looks like melted wax. One of the journeymen is missing 2 fingers from when a hot punty rod, another tool will get to it, slipped. Another has one eye that's clouded over, probably from years of staring at glowing glass without protection. The noise is constant. The roar of the furnace never stops. Tools clang against metal surfaces. There's the sound of glass being scored and cracked. The hiss when water hits hot surfaces. The grunts and calls of the workers coordinating their movements. There's a strange musical quality to breaking glass. Each crack and shatter has its own pitch, and you'll become intimately familiar with the sound of failure. Because glass breaks. Constantly. Even masters lose pieces. A bubble in the wrong place, a temperature fluctuation, too much pressure during blowing, too little, and hours of work become worthless shards on the floor. And that's where you come in with your broom, sweeping up the evidence of imperfection, trying not to think about how much money just shattered, how angry the master is, how the client isn't going to be happy. The economic pressure is intense. Glass workshops operated on commission, usually. A wealthy patron would order specific pieces, a set of goblets, perhaps, or window panes for a chapel or decorative vessels. The master would quote a price, agree on a timeline, and then the workshop would race to fulfill the order. Quality had to be perfect or the client might refuse payment. And if you're the one who bumped the table or opened a door too quickly and let in a draft that caused a piece to crack, well, that loss might come out of your meals for the next month. There's a particular smell to a glass-blowing workshop that you can't escape. It's part smoke, part hot stone, part something chemical and sharp from the materials being heated. It gets into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You smell like the workshop constantly. When you're finally allowed a few hours away, which is rare, people on the street can tell what you do just by the smell. It's not entirely unpleasant, just distinct and all-consuming. You'll smell it in your sleep, and years later, if you survive this apprenticeship, you'll catch a whiff of something similar and be instantly transported back to this hot, dim, dangerous room where you're currently trying to prove you're worthy of learning one of the medieval world's most guarded and prestigious crafts. But for now, you're just trying to make it through the night without falling asleep and letting the furnace temperature drop. The furnace is everything. It's the beating heart of the workshop, the angry god that demands constant attention, the single most expensive and important piece of equipment in the entire building. And now that you've survived your first few weeks of basic tasks, you're about to learn just how demanding and unforgiving this monster really is. The furnace structure itself is an architectural marvel that most people never appreciate. It's not just a big oven. It's a carefully engineered system built from special bricks that can withstand thermal shock. Regular bricks would crack and crumble under these temperatures. The refractory bricks used in glass furnaces are made from materials high in alumina and silica, fired at extreme temperatures themselves before they ever become part of the furnace. In medieval times, these bricks were extraordinarily expensive, often imported from regions known for their quality clay. The Venetians sourced theirs from specific areas, and the knowledge of where to get the best refractory materials was itself a trade secret. The furnace has multiple chambers. The main melting chamber, where the crucibles of raw glass materials sit, maintains the highest temperature. This is where sand becomes glass, where the frit melts into that glowing, honey-like liquid that can be worked. Surrounding this are smaller chambers, each with its own purpose and temperature zone. The glory holes, where you reheat pieces during the working process, are essentially tunnels into the side of the furnace structure. The lair, or annealing oven, is sometimes a separate structure entirely, maintaining a lower temperature, though lower is relative. It's still hot enough to badly burn you, just not hot enough to keep glass molten. Your job as the low-ranking apprentice is to ensure this beast never sleeps. And this is where your life becomes a special kind of exhausting hell. Medieval glassmakers couldn't just turn their furnaces on and off. Once you build the fire up to working temperature, it has to stay there. Cooling down completely and reheating would take days, waste enormous amounts of fuel, risk cracking the furnace structure itself from thermal expansion and contraction, and destroy any glass currently inside. So the furnace runs continuously, sometimes for years, until it absolutely must be rebuilt due to wear. This means fuel, constant fuel. Wood primarily, though some workshops use charcoal because it burns hotter and cleaner. The amount of wood required is staggering. A single glass furnace could consume several cords of wood per week. To put that in perspective, that's enough wood to heat a large house through an entire winter, burned in just 7 days. The fuel costs alone made glassmaking an expensive operation, and it's why workshops were often located near forests or had arrangements with timber suppliers. And someone has to keep that fuel coming. That someone is you. Every 2 hours, day and night, the furnace needs feeding. You can't just dump a huge load of wood in and walk away for 8 hours. That doesn't work. Too much fuel at once can create temperature spikes that damage the crucibles or the glass inside them. Too little and the temperature drops, potentially ruining batches of glass that are in crucial stages of melting or annealing. It has to be steady, measured, constant, which means your life is now divided into 2-hour segments. You develop a strange relationship with time. 2 hours is simultaneously forever and no time at all. When you're trying to sleep, 2 hours is a cruel joke. You barely drift off before your internal clock or a fellow apprentice kicks you awake. But when you're doing other tasks during the day, 2 hours evaporates, and suddenly you're panicking because the furnace needs attention and you're across the workshop with your arms full of materials. The lack of continuous sleep breaks you down in ways you didn't know were possible. Human beings aren't designed for this schedule. We need sustained periods of deep sleep to function properly. You're getting fragments, never more than 90 minutes at a stretch, and often less. After a few weeks, you're existing in a fog. Your reactions slow. Your judgment suffers. You drop things, forget instructions, stare blankly when someone asks you a direct question. The journeymen mock you for it, but they remember their own apprentice years. The master mostly ignores you unless you screw up badly enough to cost him money. There's some fascinating historical debate about how medieval workers actually managed these schedules. Some historians argue that pre-industrial sleep patterns were different, that people naturally broke their sleep into segments, what's called biphasic sleep. First sleep, a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, then second sleep. Maybe medieval glassblowers were just operating on a pattern that was more normal for the era. Other scholars point out that glassblowers were notorious for dying young and suffering from various ailments, and maybe sleep deprivation was a contributing factor. Either way, you're living it and it feels like slow-motion drowning. The actual process of feeding the furnace is its own skill. You can't just throw logs in randomly. The wood needs to be the right size, split into pieces that will burn at the correct rate. Too large, and they don't burn completely, creating ash buildup and reducing efficiency. Too small, and they burn too fast, requiring more frequent feeding and creating temperature fluctuations. You learn to judge the size by eye and by weight. The wood also needs to be properly seasoned, dried for months or even years before use. Green wood, full of moisture, doesn't burn hot enough and creates excessive smoke. The smoke is already bad enough with dry wood. Adding moisture to the equation would make the workshop even more unbearable. Someone somewhere in the supply chain had to cut trees, split them, stack them properly for air circulation, and let them age. In a large workshop, there might be a dedicated fuel storage building with wood in various stages of seasoning. In a smaller operation, wood might be stacked along the walls of the workshop itself, which is a fire hazard but also convenient. You approach the furnace with your arms loaded with wood. The heat intensifies with every step. By the time you're at the furnace opening, your face is burning, your eyes are tearing up, and you're sweating through your clothes despite it being the middle of winter. The opening glows with an intensity that's almost hypnotic, deep reds and oranges that pulse with the movement of the flames inside. You can hear the roar of the fire, feel the updraft pulling air into the hungry combustion. There's a technique to adding fuel. You don't just toss it in from a distance because you need the wood to land in the right place, where it will burn efficiently and maintain the temperature zones within the furnace. So you step closer, closer than any sane part of your brain wants to go, and use a long iron rod to push the wood into position. The radiant heat on your hands and face is almost unbearable. Your instinct is to rush, to get it done and get away from the heat, but rushing leads to mistakes. Drop a log in the wrong spot and it might block air circulation, causing part of the furnace to cool down. Place it too far from the main fire, and it won't catch, just smolders and wastes fuel. The masters can judge furnace temperature by eye, by the color of the flames and the glow of the furnace interior. Orange means it's too cool, around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Yellow-orange is better, approaching 2,000 degrees. White or even blue tints mean you're getting up into the 2,200 to 2,300 range, which is perfect for working glass but also intensely dangerous. At those temperatures, the radiant heat can blister your skin from several feet away. There are accounts of workers' leather aprons actually starting to smolder just from proximity to the furnace, not from direct contact. You're trying to learn the skill of temperature judgment, but it's frustratingly difficult. Partly it's the smoke that stings your eyes and makes it hard to see clearly. Partly it's inexperience. You don't yet have the reference library of colors and intensities that comes from years of observation. And partly it's because you're exhausted, always exhausted, and everything blurs together. You think the furnace looks maybe too cool, so you add extra fuel, and then the master barks at you because now it's running too hot and they'll have to compensate for the rest of the shift. Or you think it looks fine, but it's actually dropping in temperature, and several hours of work are potentially compromised. The ash removal is another constant task. Wood burning at these temperatures produces ash, obviously, but the quantity is surprising. It accumulates rapidly, and too much ash can insulate the fuel from air, choking the fire. It also builds up in the bottom of the furnace, eventually needing to be removed before it starts interfering with the structure's efficiency. This is brutally unpleasant work. You have to reach into lower openings in the furnace with long rakes and scoops, pulling out piles of fine, hot ash. Even though the ash has been burning, it retains heat. It gets everywhere, in your hair, your nose, your mouth. You're breathing it with every inhalation. Your face turns gray with ash dust, giving you the appearance of a ghost or a corpse. The other apprentices find this hilarious, at least until it's their turn. There's actually a market for glass furnace ash. Because it's been burned at such high temperatures, it's rich in potash and other minerals that make it valuable for soap making, textile production, and even agriculture. Some workshops sell their ash to supplement income. So you're carefully collecting the ash into containers, trying not to waste it, trying not to burn yourself in the process, and trying not to pass out from the heat and the ash particles you're inhaling. Nighttime feeding is its own special challenge. The workshop is dark except for the furnace glow, and that intense light actually makes it harder to see anything else. Your eyes adjust to the brightness of the furnace, which means the rest of the workshop becomes pitch black by comparison. You're navigating by memory, trying not to trip over tools or shards of glass, trying not to walk into a support beam or a workbench. Other apprentices have various strategies. Some keep small oil lamps burning, though that's a fire risk. Others just learn the space so thoroughly they can move through it blind. The temperature swings are disorienting. Right next to the furnace, it's hellishly hot. 10 feet away in winter, it might be barely above freezing. Your body doesn't know what to do. You're sweating and shivering at the same time. This constant thermal stress wears on you. People get sick frequently. Coughs and fevers are endemic in glass workshops. Whether that's from the temperature fluctuations, the particles in the air, the exhaustion, or all of the above, nobody really knows. Medieval medicine doesn't have answers. You just suffer through it or die if it's serious enough. And here's something that makes it all worse. You can't show weakness. The workshop culture is brutal. This is a craft of precision and toughness. If you complain about the heat, the exhaustion, the burns, you're marked as soft. The journeyman will make your life even more miserable, giving you the worst tasks, forgetting to tell you important information, letting you make mistakes that get you in trouble with the master. And the master might simply dismiss you from your apprenticeship, which would be a disaster. Your family paid for this opportunity or called insignificant favors. Being sent home in disgrace would be humiliating and potentially economically devastating. So you suffer in silence. You wake every 2 hours. You feed the furnace. You rake the ash. You try to judge temperatures you don't fully understand yet. You exist in a state of perpetual exhaustion. Your hands covered in minor burns. Your lungs full of smoke and ash. Your body confused about whether it's hot or cold. And this is just the foundation. You haven't even started actually working with glass yet. This is just keeping the workshop functional, maintaining the conditions that allow the real work to happen. The furnace has moods, or at least it seems that way. Some days it draws beautifully, the flames burning clean and hot, everything running smoothly. Other days, for no reason you can identify, it's temperamental. The fire doesn't want to catch properly. Smoke billows back into the workshop instead of venting. Temperature is inconsistent. The masters blame this on wood quality, air pressure changes with weather, the phase of the moon, or your incompetence. Probably some combination of all of those things. There's a superstition among glassblowers about talking to the furnace, treating it with respect, even making small offerings. A bit of good wine poured onto the coals, or a prayer before lighting it each day. This is technically against church teaching, which frowns on anything that smacks of pagan practice, but the church also wants its stained glass windows and its communion chalices, so it mostly looks the other way. You pick up the habit because everyone does it, and because when you're this tired and this stressed, any small ritual that might help feels necessary. Historians still argue whether these furnace-tending practices were sustainable from a human health perspective, or whether workshops simply chewed through apprentices, accepting that some wouldn't survive or would break down, and there were always more boys being sent into apprenticeships. The mortality rate for medieval craftsmen is hard to establish with certainty, but glassblowers don't seem to have been particularly long-lived. Whether that's the heat exposure, the material toxicity, the exhaustion, or just the general roughness of medieval life is impossible to say definitively. What's certain is that you're now about 4 weeks into your apprenticeship, you've aged what feels like 4 years, and you haven't even touched molten glass yet. You're just the person who keeps the fire burning, the thankless, invisible labor that makes everything else possible. And the furnace, that glowing beast, never sleeps and never shows mercy. Finally, after months of feeding furnaces and sweeping floors, you're being taught the gather. This is the fundamental movement of glassblowing, the moment where you actually touch molten glass for the first time, and it's significantly more dangerous than anyone bothered to warn you about. The blowpipe is heavier than you expected. It's a hollow iron tube roughly 4 to 5 feet long, with a mouthpiece on one end and a slightly flared gathering end on the other. The metal itself is thick-walled because it needs to withstand the thermal stress of repeated heating and cooling. When you first pick one up, your arms immediately feel the weight. This isn't some delicate artist's tool. It's a substantial piece of iron that you'll need to manipulate with precision while molten glass cools and hardens on the end. Your shoulders aren't ready for this. Nobody's shoulders are ready for this. Before you're allowed anywhere near the actual glass, you practice the motions with an empty pipe. The gathering technique looks simple when a master does it, which means it's actually incredibly complex. You heat the end of the blowpipe in the glory hole, that opening into the side of the furnace where the temperature hovers around 2000 degrees. The pipe needs to be hot before you dip it into molten glass. Otherwise, the temperature shock can cause the glass to crack or not adhere properly. So you hold this iron rod into the furnace opening, watching it gradually change color from gray to dull red to bright orange. The heat traveling up the metal pipe is a lesson in physics you're learning through pain. Even though you're holding the cool end, heat conducts along the iron. Within 30 seconds, the section you're gripping is noticeably warmer. After a minute, it's uncomfortable. The masters wrap the grip area with wet cloth or leather to slow the heat transfer, but it only helps so much. You learn to shift your grip constantly, never letting your hands settle in one position too long. This creates its own problem. If you're not gripping firmly and consistently, you can't control the pipe properly. It's a contradiction you have to solve with your body. Once the gathering end is properly heated, glowing orange, which is beautiful and terrifying, you move to the crucible. These clay pots sit inside the furnace, filled with molten glass that looks like glowing honey, moving with a slow, viscous flow that's hypnotic to watch. The glass at this temperature is roughly 2000 to 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, that's hot enough to melt aluminum. It's hot enough to ignite wood on contact. And you're about to dip a metal rod into it and pull some out. The technique requires you to lower the pipe into the molten glass at an angle, then rotate it slowly and steadily while keeping it submerged. The rotation is crucial. It ensures the glass gathers evenly around the pipe, creating a symmetrical blob. If you don't rotate consistently, you get a lopsided gather, which means everything you build from that foundation will be unbalanced. The glass wants to drip and flow downward thanks to gravity, so the rotation fights that tendency, wrapping the glass around the pipe instead of letting it slide off. This sounds simple. It's not. First, you're reaching into a furnace where the radiant heat is attacking every exposed bit of skin. Your face feels like it's burning. Your eyes are streaming tears from the heat and the glare. Your hands, even through wrappings, are cooking. And you need to hold steady, rotate smoothly, and judge when you've gathered enough glass. All while your every instinct is screaming at you to get away from this heat source immediately. You gather too little glass on your first attempt. The master makes a disapproving sound, and you have to go back in for a second gather, reheating the pipe, dipping again. Too many gathers make the glass uneven, creating layers that cool at different rates and introduce stress points. You gather too much on your second attempt, and now you've got a heavy, uneven blob that immediately starts deforming under its own weight. The master sighs, tells you to dump it back in the crucible, and you start over. The dumping process is its own skill. You can't just tip the glass off the pipe like you're pouring syrup. It's too viscous for that, and it's adhering to the hot metal. You have to sort of shake and twist the pipe while holding it over the crucible, encouraging the glass to release. Sometimes it comes off cleanly. Sometimes it stretches into long, glowing strings that have to be touched back to the main mass to break. Sometimes you accidentally fling molten glass, and everyone in the vicinity jumps back and curses at you. When you finally get a decent gather, about the size of a large orange, evenly distributed, properly heated. You have to move quickly. Glass begins cooling immediately, and as it cools, it becomes less workable. This creates a constant race against physics. Every second that passes, the glass is stiffening. You need to keep it in the Goldilocks zone of temperature, hot enough to be pliable, cool enough not to simply flow off the pipe, and consistent throughout so there aren't hot spots and cold spots that create structural weaknesses. This is where the marver comes in. It's a flat, smooth surface, traditionally polished stone, sometimes metal, where you roll the gather to shape it and cool it slightly. The technique is to lay the gather on the marver and roll the pipe back and forth, applying gentle pressure. This shapes the glass into a more uniform cylinder or sphere, smooths the surface, and brings the temperature down just a touch. It also begins the process of aligning the glass molecules in a way that reduces internal stress. Your first attempts at marvering are disasters. You press too hard, and the glass flattens like a pancake. You don't press hard enough, and nothing happens. You roll unevenly, creating a shape that looks like a lumpy potato. The glass sticks to the marver, refusing to release, and you panic and yank the pipe upward, creating a stringy mess. Or you roll too slowly, and the glass cools too much, becoming stiff and inflexible before you've accomplished anything. The masters make it look effortless. They gather, marver in 3 or 4 smooth rolls, and have a perfect cylinder ready for the next step. You take 24 attempts to produce something that's merely acceptable, and by that point, your arms are shaking from fatigue and the pipe keeps dipping and wobbling because you can't hold it steady anymore. And we haven't even gotten to the blowing part yet. That's coming, but first you need to master the gather and the marver, because everything else builds on this foundation. If your gather is wrong, everything that follows will be wrong. It's like trying to build a house on a crooked foundation. You can compensate somewhat, but you're always fighting that initial error. The timing becomes instinctive after hundreds of hours of practice, but right now you have no instincts. You're thinking about every movement, which makes you slow and clumsy. Should you reheat now or try to work with what you have? Is this glass too cool, or do you just not know how to work with it properly? Should you add more glass, or is this enough? Every decision is a guess, and most of your guesses are wrong. The reheating process is constant. Unlike working with clay, which stays workable as long as you keep it moist, glass has a very specific working temperature range. Once it drops below about 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, it becomes too stiff to shape effectively. So you're constantly returning to the glory hole, sticking the pipe with its gather back into the furnace opening, rotating it to heat evenly, pulling it out to work for 30 seconds or a minute, then back in again. Each reheating cycle risks damaging your work. If you heat it too much, the glass becomes too fluid and deforms under its own weight. If you heat it unevenly, you create hot spots and cool spots that become structural weaknesses. The glass can actually crack during reheating if the temperature change is too rapid. You need to ease it in and out of the heat zone, not shock it. But you also can't be too slow, because time is limited and the master has a schedule to keep and clients waiting for their orders. The glass changes color as it heats and cools, and you're supposed to learn to judge temperature by these color shifts. When it comes out of the crucible, it's bright orange-yellow, almost white at the hottest point. As it cools, it shifts through orange to dark red to a barely visible red glow. Once it stops glowing entirely, it's too cool to work. You're somewhere below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and the glass is rigid. But here's the tricky part. In the dim workshop, your eyes adjust to see the faint glow of glass that's cooler. In brighter light, you might not see that glow at all. This is why glassblowers work in relatively dark environments. They need to see the subtle color changes that indicate temperature. There's a sound, too, that experienced glassblowers listen for. When you tap a tool against glass that's at proper working temperature, it makes a particular muted thunk. Glass that's too cool makes a higher, more ring-like sound. Glass that's too hot might not register sound the same way. the tool might slightly embed or stick. You're trying to learn this auditory feedback, but right now all sounds blur together in the constant noise of the workshop. The dripping is relentless and dangerous. Molten glass wants to flow downward, and no matter how carefully you work, little bits drip off your gather. These droplets fall to the floor where they create hazards. Fresh drips are still molten and can burn through shoe leather. Slightly cooled drips solidify into sharp little glass beads that crunch underfoot and can slice skin if you handle them wrong. The floor around the working area is covered in these layers of failed attempts, drips, spills, and shattered pieces. Someone sweeps regularly, but it's a losing battle. Glass accumulates faster than it can be cleared. You develop a constant awareness of spatial positioning. Where is everyone else in the workshop? Where are the heat sources? Where is your path to the marver, to the glory hole, to the annealing oven? You're carrying something that can cause serious burns, to yourself, to others, to the building itself. One careless turn, one moment of inattention, and you've either burned someone or destroyed hours of work by bumping into another craftsman's piece. There's a strange intimacy to working with molten glass. It's responsive in a way that few materials are. When you gather it, you can feel the weight and the heat through the pipe. When you roll it on the marver, you can sense how it's responding to pressure. It has a sort of life to it, not actually alive, obviously, but possessing qualities that make it feel like you're negotiating with something that has its own preferences. The glass wants to flow, wants to equalize temperature, wants to find equilibrium. Your job is to impose shape and form on it before it reaches that equilibrium. Medieval glassblowers didn't understand glass as a supercooled liquid or understand the molecular structures they were manipulating. They worked purely from experience and tradition, passing down techniques that worked without fully understanding why they worked. The Venetians, especially, had developed elaborate methods through trial and error over centuries. They knew that adding certain materials created certain colors, cobalt for blue, manganese for purple, gold for ruby red. But they didn't understand the chemistry. They just knew it worked, and they guarded these recipes like military secrets. The physical strain accumulates quickly. Your shoulders burn from holding the pipe extended. Your lower back aches from bending over the marver. Your hands are developing blisters despite the cloth wrappings. The constant rotation of the pipe creates friction, and the heat causes the blisters to form faster and more painfully than normal. Some apprentices' hands basically become one large callus over time. Others never develop sufficient tolerance and wash out of the profession. Your first successful gather and marver, truly successful, meeting the master's approval, happens after 3 weeks of daily practice. 3 weeks of burning yourself, dropping gathers, creating misshapen lumps, and being told you're wasting expensive materials and everyone's time. When you finally roll out a smooth, even cylinder of glass, properly heated and sized, the master just grunts and says, "Acceptable. Now do it 100 more times exactly like that." There's no celebration, no acknowledgement that you've just achieved something difficult. You've merely reached the baseline of competence, the starting point from which actual learning can begin. And that cylinder you just made, it's going right back into the crucible to be melted down, because you're not skilled enough yet to continue working it into an actual object. You're just practicing the gather and marver over and over until it becomes automatic, until you can do it while exhausted, while distracted, while the workshop is in chaos because 3 pieces are being worked simultaneously and everyone's shouting instructions and the furnace is acting temperamental. The burns you accumulate during this learning phase become a sort of timeline of your mistakes. The one on your left forearm from when you let the pipe tilt and molten glass dripped onto you. The blistered patch on your right hand from gripping too close to the heated section. The mark on your cheek from when you turned your face too close to the glory hole and the radiant heat essentially sunburned you instantly. Each scar is a lesson, a reminder of what not to do, purchased with pain. There's dark humor among the glassblowers about who has the most impressive burns. The journeymen show off scars like war medals, the time they grabbed a hot punty rod without thinking, the splash pattern from when a gather fell into water, the permanent mark from when a piece shattered and a shard embedded itself in flesh. You're building your own collection, though right now they're mostly minor. The serious injuries come later when you're working faster and with more complex pieces, when split-second mistakes have bigger consequences. But right now, you're just trying to perfect this one fundamental skill. Gathering molten glass from the crucible, marvering it into a workable shape, and maintaining it at proper working temperature. This is the foundation. Everything else, blowing, shaping, adding decorative elements, creating the objects that will earn the workshop its reputation and income. All of it depends on this single basic technique that's proving to be far harder than you ever imagined. Now comes the part that gives glassblowing its name, and it's the moment when you realize that your lungs are about to become a critical tool in a process that could very easily go catastrophically wrong. You're about to blow air into molten glass, creating a bubble inside something that's hovering around 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, and the margin for error is roughly the width of a hair. The blowpipe has a small mouthpiece on the end opposite from where you gathered the glass. It's just a hole really maybe half an inch in diameter, and through this tiny opening you're expected to inflate glass with the precision of a skilled balloon artist, except the balloon is made of material that can melt your face off. The mouthpiece is hot, not molten glass hot, but uncomfortably warm from heat conducting along the iron pipe. You learn very quickly to blow in short, controlled puffs rather than pressing your lips fully against the metal, because that's a good way to burn your mouth. Your first instruction is simple. Gather a small amount of glass, marver it into a cylinder, and blow a tiny bubble inside. Just a bubble. Nothing fancy, nothing complex. This should be straightforward. It's not. The technique requires you to hold the pipe horizontally or at a slight downward angle. Never tipped upward, because molten glass flows and you don't want it running back toward your face. You take a breath, seal your lips around the mouthpiece, and blow gently. Nothing happens. You blow harder. Still nothing visible, though you can feel resistance, like blowing through a partially clogged straw. You blow even harder, and suddenly the glass deforms in a lopsided bulge that immediately starts drooping downward because you've blown it too thin in one spot. The master size. Too hard, too fast, not rotating. Again. You dump the failed gather back into the crucible and start over. Gather, marver, position the pipe, blow. This time you remember to rotate constantly. That's crucial, you're learning. If you blow while holding the pipe still, the air pressure finds the weakest or hottest point in the glass and expands it unevenly. By rotating steadily, you distribute the air pressure, encouraging the bubble to form symmetrically. But coordinating blowing and rotating while holding a heavy pipe steady is like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, except one hand is also holding a moderately heavy weight and everything is on fire. Your arms shake from the effort. The pipe wants to tilt downward, it's heavy, especially with glass on the end, and your muscles aren't conditioned for this yet. If it tilts too much, the glass sags under gravity. If you overcorrect upward, you risk dripping glass backward toward yourself. You're trying to blow, rotate, hold steady, watch the glass for changes, and not pass out from the heat and the physical exertion all at once. The amount of air pressure required is surprisingly specific. Too little, and you're just huffing into the pipe without accomplishing anything. The glass is too viscous to expand easily. Too much, and you blow the glass too thin too fast, creating weak spots that will crack during cooling, or worse, you blow right through the glass, creating a hole that ruins the entire piece. You need sustained, moderate pressure, the kind you'd use to blow up a tough balloon, maintained steadily while you rotate. And here's a detail nobody warned you about. You're breathing in as you pull the pipe away from your mouth between puffs, and you're doing this right next to a furnace that's been running for months. The air you're inhaling is hot, dry, full of smoke particles and silica dust and ash. Your throat feels like sandpaper, Your lungs burn. You start coughing mid-blow, which ruins the pressure and deforms the glass. The master is not sympathetic. Control your breathing or find another profession. There's also the very real danger of inhaling at the wrong moment. If you accidentally suck air while your mouth is on the pipe and the glass is still molten, you could pull in a wisp of superheated air or even glass particles. This can sear your throat and lungs. It's rare, but it happens, and there's a journeyman in the workshop with a raspy, damaged voice from when he was learning and made exactly this mistake. He survived, obviously, but his breathing has never been quite right since. The bubble you're trying to create needs to be centered within the gather. This seems obvious, but it's incredibly hard to achieve. If your initial gather wasn't perfectly symmetrical, or if you didn't marver it evenly, or if the temperature isn't consistent throughout the glass, the bubble will form off-center. An off-center bubble means an unbalanced piece, which means it will be structurally weak, aesthetically flawed, and possibly unsellable. You can sometimes correct for this by reheating and carefully manipulating the glass, but it's always better to get it right initially. The visual feedback is subtle. At first, you can't see the bubble forming at all. The glass is opaque when it's hot and glowing. You have to judge by feel, by the resistance you encounter when blowing, by slight changes in how the glass moves on the end of the pipe. As you continue working and the glass begins to cool slightly, you start to see the shadow of the bubble inside, a darker area within the orange glow. This is when you can assess whether it's centered, whether it's round, whether you need to blow more or stop. The glass cools quickly once you stop actively heating it. You might have 30 seconds to a minute of working time before it stiffens too much. This creates intense time pressure. You gather, marver, start blowing, rotate, check your work, and realize you need to reheat already. Back to the glory hole, carefully warming the glass without overheating it, then back to blowing. Each cycle has to be precise. Too many reheating cycles and you risk devitrification. The glass can start to crystallize on the surface, becoming cloudy and brittle. Too few cycles and you haven't worked the piece enough to get the shape you need. Your breath control becomes crucial. You can't just blow continuously until you're out of air. You'll get dizzy and possibly pass out, which is dangerous when you're holding molten glass near your face. You take a breath, blow for a few seconds, rotate, pull away and breathe, then blow again. It's rhythmic, almost meditative when done properly, but right now you're gasping and hyperventilating and getting lightheaded. The heat doesn't help. You're breathing air that's probably 15 or 20 degrees hotter than comfortable, and it's depleted of oxygen from the furnace consuming everything available. There's technique to breathing itself in a glass workshop. Short breaths through your mouth when you're near the heat sources, deeper breaths through your nose when you step back. Never deep breaths right next to the furnace or while bending over a hot piece. You'll sear your lungs. Some older glassblowers develop a characteristic shallow breathing pattern that stays with them even outside the workshop. Their lung capacity is often reduced from years of inhaling particles and hot air, so they've adapted their breathing to match their diminished capacity. The bubble, once you finally create one successfully, is beautiful. You hold the pipe up to the light, and you can see this perfect sphere of air trapped inside the glowing glass, like a miniature sun with its own atmosphere. For a moment, you understand why people are willing to endure all this misery. You've just manipulated one of nature's fundamental materials, taking sand and fire and breath and creating something that didn't exist before. It's almost magical. Then the master tells you to make it bigger, and you realize this was just the beginning. Creating the initial bubble is just step one. Now you need to inflate it further, shaping it into a vessel or whatever form is needed, and doing so while maintaining even wall thickness, consistent temperature, and structural integrity. The bubble can't be too thin anywhere or it will shatter during annealing. It can't be too thick or the piece will be heavy, expensive in materials, and difficult to cool properly. The blisters on your palms are rupturing from the constant rotation of the pipe. The cloth wrapping soaks up the fluid from broken blisters, which then dries from the heat, essentially gluing the cloth to your raw skin. Removing the wrapping at the end of the day is its own special torture. The fabric pulls at the damaged skin, reopening wounds that had started to scab. Some apprentices wrap their hands so tightly that they restrict blood flow, going numb, which seems like a mercy until you realize you've lost fine motor control and can't feel when you're gripping incorrectly. Your lungs are developing a permanent ache. Every breath feels slightly labored, like you're breathing through a thin cloth. This is partially from the heat and exertion, but also from the constant inhalation of particulates. Medieval glassblowers didn't have dust masks or respirators. They just breathed whatever was in the air, and what was in the air was silica dust, ash, smoke, and various chemical compounds released by the heating glass and fluxes. This material settles in the lungs, accumulating over months and years, gradually reducing respiratory capacity. But you're 17 years old and you figure you'll worry about that later, assuming you survive your apprenticeship at all. The coordination required becomes clearer as you practice. Your dominant hand holds and rotates the pipe. Your other hand manipulates tools, paddles for shaping, shears for cutting, jacks for creating openings. And somehow, while managing all of this, you also need to blow at the right moments. It's like learning to play a musical instrument, except the instrument weighs 15 pounds, is covered in molten glass, and can permanently disfigure you if you make a mistake. You're also learning to gauge the thickness of the glass walls by how they respond to air pressure. Thinner areas expand more easily. You can feel this through the pipe, a subtle difference in resistance. If you feel an area expanding too readily, you need to stop blowing, reheat to even out the temperature, or risk a blowout. A blowout is when the air pressure breaches the glass, creating a hole. Sometimes it's a small pinprick that can be patched or worked around. Sometimes the entire bubble collapses catastrophically. Glass drooping and folding, hours of work instantly ruined. The sound of a blowout is distinctive. A soft hiss or pop as air escapes through molten glass, followed by the deflating sag of the collapsing form. Everyone in the workshop recognizes this sound instantly. Other craftsmen wince in sympathy. The master curses, and you stand there holding a ruined piece, feeling the weight of failure and wasted materials and lost time. Glass isn't cheap. The materials cost money, the fuel to heat them costs money, and the hours invested represent potential income the workshop isn't earning. Every failure is a small financial disaster. Historians still argue whether medieval apprentices were charged for major mistakes or whether that cost was just absorbed as part of training. Certainly, apprentices who consistently wasted materials would be dismissed. But whether individual pieces were tallied against an apprentice's account, creating a debt they'd have to work off, varies by region and by workshop. What's certain is that the economic pressure was real and constant. You weren't just learning a craft, you were learning it in an environment where mistakes had immediate financial consequences for everyone involved. Your first successfully blown bubble that gets developed into an actual object, a simple cup, nothing fancy, takes 3 months of daily practice. 3 months of gathering, marvering, blowing, reheating, shaping. 3 months of burns and blisters and aching lungs and sore shoulders. 3 months of failures, each one a lesson purchased with pain and embarrassment. When you finally produce something that the master deems acceptable enough to go into the annealing oven rather than back into the crucible, you feel a rush of pride that's immediately tempered by the master's next words. Adequate. Tomorrow you'll make 6 of them. Because one acceptable piece isn't a skill, it's luck. Consistency is the skill. Being able to produce the same quality piece repeatedly, even when you're tired, even when the furnace is temperamental, even when the workshop is chaotic with multiple orders in progress, that's what makes you valuable. And you're nowhere near that level yet. You've just proven you can occasionally, under ideal conditions, create something that isn't completely terrible. Your breathing has changed. You don't notice it consciously, but if someone were paying attention, they'd see that you now take shallower breaths, that you pause before inhaling deeply, that you instinctively turn your face away from heat sources when breathing. These adaptations are your body trying to protect itself from the environment that's slowly damaging it. In 10 years, if you're still doing this work, your lung capacity will be noticeably reduced. In 20 years, you'll probably have what they call glassblower's consumption, a chronic respiratory condition that makes you cough constantly and struggle to catch your breath. But that's future you's problem. Present you is just trying to get through the day without ruining another gather or passing out from heat exhaustion or accidentally inhaling at the wrong moment and searing your throat. The bubble floats inside the glass, fragile and temporary, waiting for you to shape it into something beautiful or useful or both. Your breath, your literal life force, is now trapped inside this material that was sand just hours ago and will be a goblet or a window pane or a decorative vessel soon. There's something profound about that, though you're usually too exhausted and stressed to appreciate the poetry. You're just trying not to screw up, trying to meet the master's standards, trying to justify the investment your family made in this apprenticeship, trying to survive another day in this hot, dangerous, unforgiving workshop where your lungs and your hands are the primary tools and both are being slowly destroyed in service of creating beauty for people who will never know your name. The guild controls everything, and you're about to learn that medieval glassblowing isn't just a craft. It's a secret society with the power to destroy your life if you step out of line. The technical skills you're developing are only half the apprenticeship. The other half is learning to navigate a labyrinth of rules, hierarchies, and jealously guarded secrets that make modern non-disclosure agreements look like friendly suggestions. The Glassblowers Guild in your city, and there's definitely a guild, because no one works glass without guild approval, operates with the authority of both a trade organization and a quasi-religious order. Membership isn't automatic. Your master had to petition the guild to accept you as his apprentice, providing documentation of your family's respectability, proof that the apprenticeship fee was paid, and assurances that you weren't the son of anyone involved in a dishonorable profession. Yes, medieval guilds actually cared about this. If your father was an executioner, a prostitute, or a gravedigger, you might be barred from guild membership regardless of your talent. The guild hall is where the power resides. It's a substantial building, better constructed than most houses in the city, with a meeting room that smells of old wood and candle wax. The masters gather here monthly, sometimes more frequently if there's important business. They set prices, allocate contracts, settle disputes, and most importantly, they guard the secrets of the craft with an intensity that borders on paranoia. You attend your first guild meeting about 6 months into your apprenticeship. It's primarily observational. You're there to be formally registered, to have your apprenticeship contract witnessed by the guild membership, and to hear the rules. The rules are extensive, and the penalties for breaking them are severe. First and foremost, you don't talk about techniques outside the guild. Not to friends, not to family beyond the most general descriptions, definitely not to anyone from another city or region. The specific recipes for glass formulas, the exact temperatures used, the particular methods for achieving certain colors or clarity, these are trade secrets, and revealing them is considered theft. Not metaphorical theft, actual theft, punishable under both guild law and, in some cases, city law. The Venetians took this to extremes. Murano, the island where Venice concentrated its glass industry, was essentially a gilded prison. The glassblowers there produced the finest glass in Europe, and they were forbidden from leaving the Republic. Not forbidden from revealing secrets, forbidden from physically leaving. A master glassblower who tried to move to another city or country to set up a competing workshop could be hunted down by Venetian agents. There are documented cases of assassinations, of glassblowers being murdered in foreign cities for the crime of taking their knowledge elsewhere. Your guild isn't quite that extreme, but the underlying principle is the same. Knowledge is power, and power must be controlled. You swear an oath. The exact wording varies by region and time period, but the essence is always similar. You vow to keep the secrets of the craft, to obey your master, to respect the guild's authority, to maintain quality standards, and to never work for non-guild members or teach non-approved apprentices. You swear this on the Bible or on a saint's relic if the guild has one, and everyone present witnesses your oath. Breaking it isn't just a breach of contract. It's a spiritual failing, a sin that jeopardizes your immortal soul. At least that's how it's framed. The reality is that it's a mechanism of economic control, but wrapping it in religious language makes it more enforceable in a deeply Christian society. The guild also controls production volume. This is crucial for maintaining high prices. If too much glass enters the market, prices drop, and everyone's income suffers. So the guild limits how many workshops can operate, how many apprentices each master can take, and sometimes even how much glass a workshop can produce in a given period. This isn't written down in public records, it's understood, enforced through social pressure and economic retaliation. A master who overproduces might find that other guild members refuse to sell him materials, or that the guild forgets to allocate him the prestigious contracts with wealthy clients. Quality control is supposedly the guild's primary function, and there's some truth to that. Guild inspectors can examine finished pieces, and items deemed substandard can be destroyed. This protects the reputation of glasswork from your city. If only excellent pieces reach the market, the city's glass becomes known for quality, commanding higher prices. But it's also a weapon. If a master falls out of favor with guild leadership, suddenly his pieces are failing inspection at suspicious rates. The inspectors claim they're just maintaining standards, but everyone knows it's political. Your master navigates this system carefully. He's a full member in good standing, which means he votes in guild decisions and serves occasionally on committees. But he's not in the inner circle, the handful of senior masters who really control things. Those men own multiple workshops, have wealthy patrons, and have been guild members for decades. They decide which contracts go to whom, they set the examination standards for journeymen seeking to become masters, and they can effectively end someone's career with a word to the right people. You're learning this social structure alongside the technical craft. You learn which masters are allies, which are rivals, which hold grudges. Your master has a long-running dispute with another glassblower over a contract from 10 years ago. Something about a commission that was promised to your master but given to the rival instead. This petty feud means you're not allowed to speak to that rival's apprentices. Even though you're roughly the same age and live in the same neighborhood, guild politics trickle down through the entire hierarchy. The examination system is another control mechanism. After 7 to 12 years as an apprentice, you can petition to become a journeyman. This requires creating a masterpiece, not in the modern sense of a single perfect work, but a demonstration piece that proves you've mastered the fundamental techniques. You propose what you'll make, the guild approves or suggests modifications, and then you create it under observation. If it's judged adequate, you become a journeyman, which means you can work for wages in any guild workshop but can't open your own business yet. But here's the catch. The guild decides what's adequate, and that decision is influenced by factors beyond pure skill. Is there room in the market for another journeyman right now? Does your master have sufficient influence to advocate for you? Have you offended anyone important? A technically perfect piece can fail examination if the politics aren't favorable. And if you fail, you wait another year to try again, continuing to work as an apprentice, which is cheaper for your master and maintains the limited supply of qualified craftsmen. The path from journeyman to master is even more constrained. To become a master, you need to demonstrate not just technical skill but also economic viability. You need capital to establish a workshop, to build or lease a furnace, to purchase materials and tools, to pay for journeymen and apprentices. Most journeymen never make this leap. They work for wages their entire careers, which is respectable and can be comfortable, but you're always working for someone else, always subject to their decisions. Some journeymen marry the master's daughter or widow, inheriting the workshop. Others save for decades to buy out a retiring master. A few are sponsored by wealthy patrons who see profit potential. But the guild maintains strict control over who gets to open new workshops. And the answer is usually no one, because we have enough workshops already. This artificial scarcity keeps prices high and reduces competition, which benefits existing masters enormously and frustrates ambitious journeymen endlessly. Historians still argue whether the guild system was primarily about maintaining quality standards or about economic protectionism. The guilds themselves claimed it was all about quality, protecting consumers from inferior products, preserving the honor of the craft, maintaining traditional methods. Critics, both contemporary and modern, point out that it was really about maintaining monopoly power, restricting competition, and extracting maximum profit from artificial scarcity. Both things were probably true simultaneously. Quality standards were real, but they were also convenient tools for controlling who could participate in the trade. There are also the secret techniques that aren't discussed even within the guild except among the most senior masters. The recipes for certain rare colors, for instance, ruby red glass, made with gold, is incredibly expensive and difficult to produce. The exact proportions and techniques are known to only a few masters, and they guard this knowledge obsessively. If you want to learn how to make ruby glass, you need to be taken into confidence by someone who knows, and that happens only if you're trusted implicitly and have proven your absolute loyalty. Your master knows some of these advanced techniques, but he's not sharing them with you yet. You're still an apprentice, still unproven, still years away from being trustworthy enough to know the most valuable secrets. This creates a strange dynamic where you work alongside someone daily, learning from them, but knowing that they're deliberately withholding knowledge. It's not personal, it's just business. Information is capital, and capital isn't distributed freely. The guild also regulates behavior outside the workshop. You're expected to maintain moral standards, attend church regularly, avoid public drunkenness, not consort with prostitutes openly, stay out of fights. The guild's reputation depends on its members being respectable citizens. If you bring scandal on yourself, you bring it on the guild, and that can result in disciplinary action ranging from fines to expulsion. Expulsion is essentially a death sentence for your career. Without guild membership, you can't legally practice the craft anywhere that has guild control, which is everywhere that matters. There are always people working outside the guild system, untrained laborers making cheap glass, itinerant workers who move from town to town staying ahead of guild enforcement, regional areas where guild control is weak. But the quality is usually poor, the income is marginal, and you're always at risk of being shut down if you venture somewhere with strong guild presence. The guild has deals with city governments, paying taxes and fees in exchange for legal protection and enforcement of guild monopolies. A city guard will help shut down an unlicensed glassblower if the guild complains, because the guild is a significant source of tax revenue and political support. Your master pays substantial dues to the guild, annual fees based on his workshop's income, plus additional charges for each apprentice and journeyman he employs, plus assessments for special projects like building repairs or guild festivities. These costs are significant, but they're the price of market access. In return, the guild theoretically protects him from unfair competition, provides a forum for dispute resolution, and maintains the collective reputation that allows him to charge premium prices. The feast days and religious observances are also guild-controlled. Glassblowers have a patron saint, Saint Luke in many regions, though this varies, and the guild organizes elaborate celebrations on the saint's feast day. These aren't optional. You're expected to attend, to contribute to the costs, to participate in the procession through the city. It's partly religious observance, partly public relations to remind the city of the guild's importance, and partly a demonstration of internal hierarchy. The masters walk at the front of the procession, wearing their finest clothes. Journeymen follow. Apprentices bring up the rear, carrying banners or guild symbols. These public displays serve multiple purposes. They reinforce internal hierarchy. Everyone knows their place and demonstrates it publicly. They advertise the guild's prosperity and importance to the broader community. And they're a warning to anyone considering working outside the guild system. Look at this organization, its wealth, its connections, its power. Would you really want to oppose this? The penalties for breaking guild rules are calibrated to hurt. Minor infractions result in fines, painful but survivable. More serious violations might result in suspension, meaning you can't work for weeks or months, during which time you're earning nothing but still need to eat and pay rent. The most serious violations result in expulsion, which, as mentioned earlier, essentially ends your career. But there are also informal punishments. A master can make an apprentice's life miserable without officially doing anything. Extra work, more dangerous tasks, deliberate withholding of instruction. All of this can happen without violating any formal rules. You're trapped in this system and you know it. You've invested years of your life, your family has invested money, and walking away means all of that is lost. So you comply. You keep the secrets, you follow the rules, you navigate the politics as best you can, and you hope that eventually you'll accumulate enough skill, reputation, and capital to achieve some measure of independence. But that's years away if it happens at all. For now, you're bound by oath, by economics, by social pressure, and by the very real threat of consequences if you step out of line. The guild's power extends beyond just the craft. Guild members often serve on city councils, hold positions in other civic organizations, and intermarry with merchant families. The networks of influence are dense and overlapping. Crossing the Glassblower's guild might mean difficulties getting credit from certain moneylenders, or finding that merchants are suddenly less willing to do business with you, or that your sons are rejected from other guilds' apprenticeships. The tendrils of guild power reach far, and they squeeze when necessary. And all of this, every oath, every rule, every political maneuvering, exists alongside the actual work of making glass. You still have to feed the furnace, gather molten material, blow bubbles, shape vessels, all while navigating a social and economic system designed to control you. It's exhausting in ways that go beyond physical labor. The constant awareness that you're being evaluated, that mistakes have consequences beyond just ruined glass, that your future depends on pleasing people and following rules that aren't always clearly stated. It wears on you mentally in ways the heat and the burns never could. Your lungs are dying, slowly and irreversibly, and everyone in the workshop knows it. They just don't talk about it, because acknowledging the inevitable doesn't change anything, and there's glass to make and money to earn. Welcome to the part of your apprenticeship where you start understanding why glassblowers rarely live to see their grandchildren. The dust is everywhere. You noticed it from your first day, of course, the fine particles that hang in the air, catching the light from the furnace, creating a sort of hazy atmosphere that makes the whole workshop look slightly dreamlike. What you didn't understand then, but are beginning to grasp now, is that you're breathing glass. Not chunks of glass, obviously, but microscopic particles of silica so small they pass right through your nose and throat and settle deep in your lungs, where they'll stay forever. Silica dust is created at every stage of the glassmaking process. When you're grinding raw materials to create the frit, you're generating clouds of it. When you're breaking up old glass to add back into the melt, cullet they call it, and it's cheaper than using all new materials, you're creating more. When glass shatters, which happens constantly, those fragments produce dust. Even the act of working molten glass can create particles, especially during grinding or cold working processes that happen after the initial blowing. You don't see the dust accumulate in your lungs, but you feel the effects gradually. Your breathing becomes slightly labored. Not obviously, you're young and otherwise healthy, so your body compensates. But if you pay attention, you notice you're breathing a bit more shallowly. That climbing stairs leaves you slightly more winded than it used to. That deep breaths sometimes catch in your chest with a tickle that makes you cough. The cough is the marker everyone watches for. It starts as occasional. You clear your throat, hack up some phlegm, go about your day. Over months, it becomes more frequent. A chronic cough that's always lurking, worse in the mornings and evenings, sometimes producing a gray-tinged mucus that you definitely don't want to examine too closely. This is your body trying desperately to expel the foreign material embedded in your lung tissue, and it's a battle your body will slowly lose. Medieval medicine has no understanding of what we'd now call silicosis or pneumoconiosis. They don't know about alveoli, the tiny air sacs in lungs where oxygen transfers to blood, or how silica particles cause inflammation and scarring that gradually reduces lung capacity. What they do know from centuries of observation is that glassblowers get sick with breathing problems, and those problems get worse over time, and eventually people drown in their own fluids or simply waste away because they can't get enough oxygen to sustain their bodies. They call it glassblower's consumption, or sometimes just the craftsman's disease, because it affects other trades too: stonemasons, metal grinders, anyone working with fine particles. The symptoms are understood even if the mechanism isn't. Progressive shortness of breath, chronic cough, fatigue, weight loss, eventual death. Some men last 20 years after symptoms begin. Others decline rapidly within 5. There's no pattern anyone can identify, no cure anyone can offer, just the slow inevitability of damaged lungs failing to do their job. Your master has it. You can hear it in his breathing when he's working close to you. A slight wheeze, a rattle on deep inhalations. He's in his early 40s, which is actually quite old for a glassblower, and he's slowing down. He can't work the long shifts he used to. The journeymen are taking on more of the complex pieces because the master gets winded too easily now. He tries to hide it, maintains his authority through knowledge and reputation rather than physical capability. But everyone knows. In another 5 or 10 years, if he lives that long, he'll be supervising from a chair rather than working the pipe himself. One of the senior journeymen is worse. He's maybe 35, but his breathing sounds like wind through broken shutters. He works in short bursts, then has to step away to catch his breath, leaning against the wall and gasping. His lips sometimes have a bluish tint, lack of oxygen reaching his blood. He's been working glass since he was younger than you are now, spent his whole life in workshops, and his lungs are essentially stiffened scar tissue that can barely function. Everyone knows he's dying. He knows he's dying, but he keeps working because what else is there? He has no other skills, no savings to speak of, a family that depends on his wages. So he works until he physically can't anymore, and when that day comes, his family will be destitute. There are other materials in the workshop air beyond just silica. The flux materials used in glassmaking, soda ash, potash, create their own dust. Some of the colorants are toxic. Lead oxide is used for certain types of glass, creating a softer, more brilliant material that's easier to cut and polish. It's also poisonous. Chronic lead exposure causes its own set of problems: neurological damage, kidney failure, a characteristic tremor in the hands. Cobalt compounds for blue glass, manganese for purple, arsenic for white opaque glass. The medieval glassmaker's palate is a toxic soup, and you're breathing it all. The furnace smoke contributes its own damage. Wood smoke contains particulates, tar compounds, and various irritants. You're inhaling this constantly, hour after hour, day after day. Your lungs and throat become inflamed, which makes them more vulnerable to infection. Respiratory infections are common in the workshop, coughs and fevers that spread from person to person in the close quarters. Most people recover, but each infection leaves your lungs slightly weaker, slightly more scarred. There's no concept of ventilation beyond the natural openings in the building. The furnace has a chimney, but that's for the furnace itself, not for the workshop air. The idea of installing fans or creating airflow systems to remove contaminated air simply doesn't exist. You work in whatever air is available, breathing whatever particles are suspended in it, and that's just how it is. Some workshops are worse than others. Larger operations with higher ceilings and more space naturally have better air quality. The dust and smoke dissipate somewhat. Smaller workshops are concentrated death traps. And workshops that do a lot of grinding or cold working, finishing glass pieces after they've cooled, are particularly dangerous. The grinding process creates enormous amounts of fine dust, and the workers doing this are bent over their work, faces close to the material, breathing heavily from exertion. You're young enough that the damage isn't obvious yet. Your lungs have significant reserve capacity, and your body is still in its prime. You might work for 10 or 15 years before the symptoms become serious. But the damage is accumulating now with every breath. The silica particles lodge in your lung tissue, causing inflammation. Your immune system tries to wall off these foreign particles with scar tissue, but the particles can't be broken down or expelled, so the scarring just keeps building. Over years, your lungs become less elastic, less able to expand fully, less efficient at transferring oxygen to your blood. Historians still argue about the life expectancy of medieval craftsmen compared to the general population. Some studies suggest skilled artisans lived slightly longer than peasants, thanks to better nutrition and housing. But when you break it down by specific trade, the picture gets darker. Glassblowers, along with miners and metal workers, had significantly shortened lifespans. Parish records, where they exist and have been studied, show glassblowers dying in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Not ancient by modern standards, but respectable for the medieval period. But the causes of death are telling. Consumption, wasting disease, failure of breath. These phrases appear frequently. There are some folk remedies that supposedly help. Drinking milk is thought to coat the lungs and protect them, though of course that's not how anatomy works. Certain herbal teas are believed to strengthen breathing. Some glassblowers swear by regular bloodletting to remove corrupted humors from the body. None of this works, obviously, but when you're facing inevitable decline, you'll try anything that offers hope. The only thing that genuinely helps is reducing exposure, and that's not really an option. Working fewer hours means earning less money, which isn't viable for most people. Working in a better ventilated space would require building modifications that cost money workshop owners don't want to spend. Using cloths to cover your nose and mouth while working helps marginally, but it's difficult to breathe through cloth while doing physically demanding work, and it gets soaked with sweat quickly, becoming ineffective and uncomfortable. So you just accept it. This is the price of the craft. You're trading years of your life for the skill and income that glassblowing provides. When you're young, that seems like an acceptable trade. 40 or 50 seems impossibly far away, and surely you'll be one of the lucky ones who lasts longer, who doesn't get sick as badly. Denial is powerful, and everyone in the workshop participates in it collectively. You don't talk about the coughing. Don't acknowledge that the journeyman leaning against the wall is slowly suffocating. Don't think too hard about what your own future looks like. There's a dark camaraderie in this shared fate. Everyone in the workshop is breathing the same air, facing the same slow decline. Creates a bond, an understanding that outsiders can't fully grasp. You're all in this together, all sacrificing your health for the craft, and there's something almost noble in that if you frame it right. More likely it's just tragic. A group of skilled workers being slowly killed by their profession because no one knows how to make it safer and no one with power cares enough to try. The economic calculation is brutal. From a workshop owner's perspective, apprentices and journeymen are somewhat replaceable. By the time one develops serious lung problems and can't work effectively anymore, you've gotten years of labor from them. You bring in new apprentices, train them, extract their healthy years, and repeat the cycle. It's sustainable from a business perspective, even if it's devastating from a human perspective. Your family doesn't fully understand what you're facing. They see you coming home tired and dirty, but lots of work is tiring and dirty. They notice you cough sometimes, but everyone coughs. It's medieval Europe. Respiratory infections are common. You don't explain the slow accumulation of damage, partly because you don't fully understand it yourself, and partly because what would be the point? They can't afford to release you from your apprenticeship. The money is already spent, the contract is signed, and you need to learn a trade to support yourself. This is your path now. At night, lying on your straw pallet in the workshop, you sometimes wake up coughing. The dry air and the residual smoke in the building irritate your throat. You hack up phlegm, spit it into the rushes on the floor, and try to go back to sleep. Your chest feels tight, like there's a band around your ribs. You take a deep breath, as deep as you can, and feel that catch, that limitation that wasn't there a year ago. You're 18 now, 6 months into your apprenticeship, and you've already lost a measurable amount of lung function. But morning comes, and there's the furnace to feed, glass to gather, pieces to blow. The work doesn't stop for your damaged lungs any more than it stops for your burned hands or aching back. You breathe the poisoned air because it's the air that's available. You cough and wheeze along with everyone else. And you hope that maybe, somehow, you'll be different, that the disease won't hit you as hard, that you'll be one of the lucky few who makes it to old age with their breathing intact. You won't be, of course. The particles are already there, embedded in tissue that will slowly stiffen and scar. But hope is what keeps you going, hope and denial and the simple fact that you don't have other options. So you breathe each inhalation a small deposit in the account that will eventually come due, and you make glass and learn your craft and try not to think too hard about the fact that you're trading your future for your present, one poison breath at a time. Venice changed everything about glassmaking, and the story of how they did it is equal parts brilliant innovation and ruthless control. If you'd been born in Murano instead of wherever you actually are, your life would be simultaneously better and infinitely more constrained. Let me explain why Venetian glassblowers were the rock stars of the medieval craft world, and why some of them were literally murdered for trying to leave. The Venetian Republic understood something crucial about economic power: monopoly. If you control the supply of a luxury good that everyone wants and no one else can make as well, you can charge whatever you want and dictate terms to the entire market. By the 13th century, Venice had achieved exactly this with glass, particularly with their revolutionary Cristallo formula that produced glass clearer than anything Europe had seen before. The clarity was everything. Most medieval glass was greenish or brownish, clouded with impurities, perfectly functional but aesthetically limited. Venetian Cristallo was different, nearly colorless, remarkably transparent, catching light in ways that made it seem almost magical. Wealthy clients across Europe would pay absurd prices for Venetian glass. A single elaborate goblet could cost as much as a working man earned in a year. A mirror, an actual clear mirror made with Venetian glass and backed with reflective metal, was a status symbol reserved for the very wealthy. The secret was in the materials and the technique. The Venetians used a special type of soda ash derived from a plant called saltwort that grew in coastal Syria. This ash, called alum catino, had exactly the right chemical properties to create exceptionally clear glass when combined with very pure quartz sand. They also developed techniques for refining out impurities, heating and reheating the glass multiple times, skimming off contaminants, until what remained was as clear as they could make it. But here's where it gets interesting from a would-you-survive perspective. The Venetian government decided that all this valuable knowledge needed to be contained and controlled. In 1291, they passed laws moving all glass furnaces to the island of Murano, officially because of fire risk. Furnaces in the crowded city had caused several devastating fires. But the real reason was control. On an island, you could monitor who came and went. You could prevent glassblowers from sneaking away. You could create, essentially, a gilded cage. If you were a Murano glassblower, your life was paradoxical. On one hand, you were wealthy by medieval standards. The Venetian government granted glassmakers special privileges. They could carry swords, normally a right reserved for nobility. Their daughters could marry into noble families without losing the family's noble status, which was a huge deal in status-obsessed Venice. They were exempt from certain taxes. They lived in nice houses, ate good food, wore fine clothes. By any objective measure, they were successful. On the other hand, you couldn't leave. Ever. The Republic's laws were explicit. Master glassblowers were forbidden from emigrating. If you tried to leave and establish a workshop elsewhere, you were committing treason. Not breach of contract, not guild violation, actual treason against the state. And the penalties for treason were severe. The enforcement mechanism was terrifyingly efficient. Venice had an extensive intelligence network, informants throughout Europe, and agents who could reach anywhere trade routes went. If a glassblower fled to France or Germany or Bohemia and started teaching locals the Venetian techniques, word would get back to Venice. And then things would happen. There are documented cases, actual historical records, of Venetian agents tracking down defecting glassblowers and killing them. Sometimes it was direct assassination. Sometimes it was threats against family members still in Venice, pressure so intense that the defector either returned or stopped working with glass entirely. In a few cases, the families of defectors were imprisoned until the glassblower came back or died. Venice didn't mess around. The glass monopoly was too valuable to allow knowledge to spread freely. This created an atmosphere of constant surveillance and suspicion in Murano. Who might be thinking about leaving? Who's been talking to foreign merchants? Who seems dissatisfied with their situation? The guild and the government worked together to monitor the glassblowing community. Informants were everywhere. A careless comment about wishing you could see Paris or complaining about restrictions could result in an interview with authorities, at minimum. Repeatedly expressing interest in leaving could result in your passport being permanently revoked, house arrest, or worse. Yet some did try to escape because the potential rewards were enormous. A master who successfully defected and set up a workshop in another country could become fabulously wealthy. European nobles and monarchs wanted Venetian-quality glass and were willing to pay top prices and offer protection to any glassblower willing to teach them the secrets. France, Bohemia, and England all actively recruited Venetian glassmakers, offering money, land, titles, and promises of protection. The problem was that Venice's reach was long and its memory was longer. There's a famous case of a glassblower named Antonio who fled to Bohemia in the late 15th century. A bit after our period, but the patterns were established earlier. He set up a successful workshop, taught local craftsmen, and seemed to be thriving. 3 years later, he was found dead in his workshop under suspicious circumstances. Was it assassination?
Accident?
No one could prove anything, but the Venetian ambassador happened to be in the region at the time, and somehow Antonio's workshop burned down shortly after, destroying any remaining evidence of his techniques. Historians still argue whether the assassination stories are exaggerated or whether Venice really was that ruthless. The evidence is fragmentary. Diplomatic records that hint at problems being solved, guild documents that note certain glassblowers no longer working, occasional letters that mention so-and-so who went abroad and came to an unfortunate end. It's impossible to prove definitively that Venice ran a systematic assassination program, but the pattern is suggestive, and the threat was certainly real enough that people believed it and modified their behavior accordingly. The paranoia worked both ways. Venice was also obsessed with preventing industrial espionage. Foreign merchants visiting Murano were monitored. They could purchase glass but couldn't observe the manufacturing process closely. The furnace areas were off-limits. Workshop layouts were designed to prevent casual observation. Even when demonstrating finished pieces, glassblowers were trained to give vague answers about how things were made. Old family recipes, trade secrets, you understand how it is. These were the standard responses. Despite all these precautions, knowledge did leak out gradually. You can't keep secrets forever when there's enough money and enough interested parties working to uncover them. By the late medieval period and into the Renaissance, other regions were developing their own glass industries with quality approaching Venetian standards. Bohemian glass became particularly notable, but Venice maintained its dominance for centuries through a combination of genuine technical superiority and ruthless enforcement of its monopoly. For you, sitting in your non-Venetian workshop, this whole system is both inspiring and terrifying. Venice represents the pinnacle of the craft, the place every glassblower hears about, the standard against which all other work is measured. Some of the techniques have spread. Glass technology isn't entirely contained, but the very best formulas, the clearest cristallo, the most sophisticated methods remain Venetian secrets. Your master has never been to Venice, probably never will, but he's seen Venetian pieces. Every serious glassblower has. They're the benchmark, the proof of what's possible with glass if you have the perfect materials and perfected techniques. There's envy, certainly. Your workshop produces good glass, functional and sometimes beautiful, but it's not Venetian glass. The slight greenish tint that you've learned to work with that's just accepted as normal would be unacceptable in Murano. The minor imperfections that your master considers inevitable, tiny bubbles, slight color variations, wouldn't pass Venetian quality control. You're playing in a different league, and everyone knows it. But there's also relief in not being trapped. You can, theoretically, leave your city and set up elsewhere if you become a master someday. Your guild controls your work life, but it doesn't claim to own your entire existence. You're not valuable enough, your knowledge isn't rare enough to justify the level of control Venice exercises over its glassblowers. That's both humbling and liberating. You'll never be as skilled or wealthy as a Murano master, but you also won't live under constant surveillance, won't be imprisoned on an island, won't have to worry that expressing interest in the wider world might be construed as potential treason. The Venetian model does influence your guild, though. The concept of trade secrets as state secrets, of knowledge as a controlled resource, of using both rewards and punishments to maintain monopoly power, these ideas spread. Your guild isn't as sophisticated or powerful as the Venetian system, but it aspires to similar control on a smaller scale. The oaths you swear, the restrictions on sharing knowledge, the fear of outsiders learning your techniques, all of this echoes the Venetian approach. There's also the aspirational aspect. Young glassblowers dream of Murano the way modern artists might dream of Paris or New York. It's the center, the place where the real masters work, where the boundaries of the craft are being pushed. Some journeymen save money with vague dreams of somehow making it to Venice, though of course that's nearly impossible. Venice doesn't just accept foreign glassblowers into its workshops. Why would they? They have their own carefully controlled training system, their own dynastic families of glassmakers, their own surplus of skilled workers. An outsider would need extraordinary connections or skills to even get in the door, and even then would be monitored constantly as a potential spy. The luxury and the imprisonment exist in tension. Venetian glassblowers live better than you do, work in better facilities, have access to better materials, create more valuable pieces, earn more money. But they're prisoners of their own success, trapped by the value of their knowledge. You're free in ways they'll never be, even as you're constrained by poverty and limited access to the best materials and techniques. Sometimes you wonder what choice you'd make, hypothetically. If you could somehow acquire the Venetian secrets, become that skilled, but it meant living under their restrictions, would you do it? The wealth is tempting. The prestige is tempting. But the cage is real, and the threat of violence for trying to escape is real. and the constant surveillance would be suffocating. Maybe freedom to be mediocre is better than luxury with chains. Or maybe that's just what you tell yourself because you'll never actually face the choice. What's certain is that the glass world you inhabit is shaped by Venetian dominance. The prices you can charge are limited by competition with Venetian imports for high-end clients. The techniques you use are influenced by filtered-down knowledge from Venetian innovations. The guild structures that control your life are modeled, at least in part, on the Venetian system. Even thousands of miles from Murano, working in a modest workshop in a secondary city, you're living in a glass world that Venice largely defined. And somewhere, on that island in the Venetian lagoon, masters are creating pieces you'll never touch, using techniques you'll never fully learn, living lives that are simultaneously more privileged and more constrained than yours. They're the elite of your profession, the pinnacle of the craft, and they're also prisoners, well-fed, well-compensated prisoners, but prisoners nonetheless. It's a strange sort of success, and you're not entirely sure whether to envy them or pity them. Probably both, if you're being honest. The sound is something you'll never forget. That crystalline snap that means hours of work, significant money, and possibly your future have just disintegrated into worthless shards. You're about to learn that glass doesn't just break. It shatters with a finality that makes every other kind of failure seem gentle by comparison. It's your 9th month in the workshop, and you're finally being trusted to work on a piece that will actually be sold. Not a masterpiece, just a simple drinking vessel for a merchant who's ordered a dozen of them. But it's real work with real consequences. You've gathered the glass, marvered it properly, blown a reasonable bubble, shaped it into a cylinder that's acceptably even. The master has been watching intermittently and hasn't yelled at you yet, which you've learned is the closest thing to praise you're likely to receive. You're carrying the piece toward the annealing oven, the blowpipe balanced carefully, the glass still glowing faintly orange in the dim workshop. You're focused on not tripping, on keeping the pipe level, on not bumping into anything. What you don't notice is that someone has opened the door to bring in more fuel, and a gust of cold November air rushes through the workshop. The glass encounters the cold air. The temperature differential isn't even that extreme, maybe a drop of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but it's sudden, and it's uneven. The outer surface of the glass cools and contracts slightly faster than the interior. For a fraction of a second, nothing visible happens. Then you hear it, a sharp crack, like a small branch snapping. A fracture line appears, racing from the rim of the vessel downward. Before you can react, the entire piece splits, part of it sagging inward, the structural integrity completely compromised. You stand there, frozen, watching hours of work literally fall apart. The master's voice cuts through your shock. Into the cullet bin. That's 15 minutes of fuel and a half-pound of glass wasted. Try to be more aware of your surroundings. This is mild as reactions go. You've seen masters throw tools when major pieces break. You've seen apprentices beaten for particularly costly mistakes. You've heard stories of broken glass leading to broken contracts, destroyed reputations, financial ruin. Glass is beautiful and valuable specifically because it's difficult and unforgiving. The same qualities that make it prized, its hardness, its clarity, its permanence, also make it fragile in ways that other materials aren't. Thermal shock is the killer. Glass expands when heated and contracts when cooled, and if different parts of a piece are at different temperatures, internal stresses develop. These stresses can be tolerated to a degree, but beyond a certain threshold, the glass simply cracks. This is why the annealing process exists. Slowly, carefully cooling finished pieces in a controlled environment so that temperature equalizes throughout the glass without creating fatal stress points. The annealing oven is its own specialized furnace, maintaining a temperature around 800 to 1000 degrees Fahrenheit. Pieces go in hot from their final shaping and cool over hours or even days, depending on size and thickness. Rush the process and the piece will crack, sometimes immediately, sometimes hours or days later. A glass goblet that seems perfect when it comes out of the oven might spontaneously shatter the first time someone pours cold wine into it, because the internal stresses finally find release. There are other ways glass fails. Inclusions, tiny bits of unmelted material or foreign objects in the glass, create weak points. You might not see them until the piece is finished and cooling, and then suddenly a crack radiates from an invisible inclusion, and the whole thing is ruined. Bubbles in the wrong places can do the same thing. A large bubble near the surface creates a thin spot that can't handle stress. Structural flaws from shaping are common. If you blow a section too thin, it becomes a weakness. If the walls are uneven, the thick sections and thin sections cool at different rates, creating stress. If you shape something too quickly and the glass hasn't had time to equalize temperature, you're building in failure. The piece might look fine, might make it through initial cooling, but a week later when someone picks it up and it encounters normal temperature variations, it shatters. Then there's simple clumsiness. Someone bumps a workbench. Someone sets a hot tool down too close to a cooling piece. Someone walks by carrying something and doesn't notice how close they are to a nearly finished goblet. The workshop is crowded, hot, chaotic, with multiple pieces in progress and people moving constantly. Accidents are inevitable. You learn to develop a spatial awareness that borders on paranoia. Where is everyone? What are they carrying? What's hot nearby that could cause thermal shock? Is that piece stable or might it roll? The questions run constantly in the back of your mind because any moment of inattention can result in disaster. The financial pressure makes every break a small catastrophe. The materials cost money, the silica, the flux, the colorants if you're using them. The fuel to heat the furnace costs money. The labor time costs money. When a piece breaks, all of that is lost. If it's a commission piece, you have to start over, which means more materials, more fuel, more time, all cutting into profit margins that often aren't generous to begin with. Some clients are understanding. Others are not. A wealthy patron who ordered an elaborate piece for a special occasion doesn't care about your excuses when you deliver late or not at all. They'll take their business elsewhere. They'll spread word that your workshop is unreliable. They'll damage your reputation in ways that cost far more than the single broken piece. The master lives with this pressure constantly, and it flows downward through the hierarchy. Every broken piece is a failure that someone will answer for. There are superstitions around breaking glass. Some believe that the first piece broken in a new furnace predicts how that furnace's whole operational period will go. Frequent breaks if the first one happens quickly. Smooth operation if you make it weeks before the first failure. This is nonsense, obviously, but in an environment where you have limited control over so many variables, people grasp for patterns and omens. The sound of breaking glass develops different tones that experienced ears can interpret. A clean break, a piece developing a single crack that doesn't shatter it completely, makes a high, sharp sound. Catastrophic failure, where the piece essentially explodes into fragments, creates a complex crash as multiple pieces hit surfaces. The dull thunk of glass breaking against stone is different from the sharper sound of glass hitting glass. You learn these sounds, learn to interpret them, learn to judge how bad the damage is before you even turn to look. Cleaning up is its own hazard. Broken glass creates edges that are molecularly sharper than most metal blades. You're sweeping up fragments with bare or poorly protected hands, and cuts are frequent. Small cuts are so common they're barely noticed. Deeper cuts that require actual attention happen regularly. You've seen fingers sliced deeply enough that they didn't heal properly, leaving scars that pull and limit movement. The worst injuries come from shards that break off at just the wrong angle while you're working with hot glass. A piece shatters under stress while you're holding it, and suddenly you have sharp fragments embedding in your palm, except they're also hot enough to burn. You're dealing with cuts and burns simultaneously, and the pain is extraordinary. One of the journeymen has a nasty scar across his forearm from when a large piece shattered and a shard acted like a hot knife, slicing through flesh as it burned. There's also the economic calculation around saving pieces. Sometimes a crack isn't immediately fatal. The piece has a fracture, but it's still largely intact. The question becomes, do you continue working it, hoping to finish before it completely fails? Or do you give up and save the labor time? The master makes these judgment calls constantly. Sometimes he's right and a damaged piece can be completed and sold at a discount. Sometimes he's wrong and you waste another hour on something that shatters 5 minutes before completion. The annealing oven itself is a source of failures. If the temperature isn't maintained perfectly, pieces crack while cooling. If pieces are placed too close together and one fails, the fragments can damage others. If the oven door is opened too soon or too frequently, temperature fluctuations cause problems. The apprentice in charge of the annealing oven, which is sometimes you, carries enormous responsibility. A mistake here means an entire day's production can be destroyed. You learn to grieve quickly. When a piece breaks, especially one you've invested hours in, there's a moment of crushing disappointment. But you can't dwell on it. There's more work to do, other pieces waiting, the master expecting you to move on. You develop a kind of emotional callus, an ability to accept failure and immediately focus on the next attempt. This serves you well in the workshop, but probably damages you in other ways. You're learning not to invest too much emotionally in anything fragile, which is a lesson that extends beyond glassmaking. Sabotage is rare but not unheard of. In workshops with intense rivalries, there are stories of journeymen subtly damaging each other's work, creating temperature drafts at crucial moments, bumping workbenches, contaminating materials. Proving sabotage is nearly impossible. Glass breaks for so many legitimate reasons that you can't ever be certain whether that crack was accident, incompetence, or malice. The paranoia this creates is corrosive. You find yourself suspecting coworkers, wondering if that failure was really your fault or if someone engineered it. The masters themselves sometimes deliberately break pieces during training. If an apprentice is developing bad habits or techniques, the master might let them complete an entire piece, investing their time and effort, and then deliberately shatter it to make a point. See, this is what happens when you don't marver evenly. All that work wasted. It's harsh, but the lesson is memorable in ways that verbal instruction isn't. You're much less likely to repeat a mistake that cost you 3 hours of work and earned you the humiliation of watching your piece deliberately destroyed. The randomness is maddening. You can do everything right and still have a piece fail because of a variable you didn't control or couldn't see. An impurity in the raw materials. A temperature fluctuation from wind patterns outside. A structural flaw in the furnace that created an uneven heat zone. The best glassblowers in the world still lose pieces to these random factors. The craft demands perfection but operates in conditions where perfection is impossible. This teaches you something about control and acceptance. You can minimize failures through skill and attention, but you can't eliminate them. The best you can do is reduce the frequency, limit the damage, learn from each failure, and move on. It's a mindset that applies beyond glassmaking. Accepting that you can do your best and still fail through no fault of your own, that the world is full of fragile things that break despite your care, that the sound of shattering is sometimes just the cost of working with materials that are beautiful precisely because they're vulnerable. But right now, you're sweeping up the fragments of your failed vessel, dumping them into the cullet bin where they'll be melted down and used again, and you're trying not to think about how many more times you'll hear that sound, how many more pieces will break before you master this craft, how much disappointment you can absorb before it breaks something inside you that can't be remelted and reformed. The glass keeps shattering, and you keep gathering and blowing and hoping that this time, maybe this time, everything holds together. The goblet in your hands is perfect. Objectively, genuinely perfect. The walls are even, the rim is smooth, the stem is symmetrical, and the foot is balanced. It caught the morning light filtering through the workshop's high windows, throwing prismatic colors across the stone wall, and for just a moment you felt something like pride. Then you remembered that this beautiful thing you created will be delivered to a nobleman's estate this afternoon, that he'll drink wine from it without ever thinking about how it was made, and that you'll never see it again. Your name won't be associated with it. Your skill will be invisible, and tomorrow you'll make another one. This is the reality that settles on you after a full year of apprenticeship. The craft is real, the skill is real, the beauty is genuine, but it exists in service to a system where you're invisible and disposable, where your labor creates value that enriches others while slowly destroying you, and where the objects you pour your life into belong to people who will never know you existed. The nobleman who commissioned this set of goblets will display them at a feast. His guests will admire them, commenting on the clarity, the delicate stem, the way light plays through the glass. They might ask where he acquired such fine pieces. He'll mention the city, perhaps, or the general reputation of the local glass guild. He definitely won't mention the workshop's name, and he certainly won't mention you. Why would he? You're an apprentice in a craft workshop, as anonymous as the person who wove the tablecloth or forged the serving spoons. Your hands are covered in scars now. The burn marks have faded from angry red to pale silver, mapping a year's worth of mistakes and learning across your skin. Your palms have calluses that will never fully go away. Your fingertips are permanently slightly numb from repeated minor burns. When you grasp things, you have to grip harder than you used to because you can't feel as precisely. These hands created beauty, and beauty destroyed them incrementally. Your breathing isn't right anymore. You noticed it a few weeks ago, really noticed it, when you tried to run to catch up with a delivery cart and had to stop after 100 yards, gasping. Your lungs don't expand the way they used to. That tickle in your chest that makes you cough is now constant, a companion that follows you from waking to sleep. You're 19 years old, and your respiratory system is already damaged in ways that will limit and shorten your life. The masters don't talk about this. The journeymen don't talk about this. There's a collective agreement not to acknowledge what everyone knows, that this craft consumes the people who practice it. The glass is permanent, enduring for decades or centuries if not broken. The glassmakers are temporary, used up and discarded, replaced by the next generation of apprentices who haven't yet realized what they're trading for the privilege of making beautiful things. You're learning to spot the calculations in clients' eyes when they visit the workshop. They see the finished pieces, admire them, and then negotiate prices with the master. They're assessing value based on materials and rarity and fashion, running their own mental mathematics about what they can afford and what status these objects will confer. They don't factor in the cost to you. The burned hands, the damaged lungs, the years of your life spent in exhausting, dangerous labor. That cost is invisible to them, externalized onto you and your fellow craftsmen, not part of the transaction. The guild system that seemed so impressive and organized when you first learned about it now reveals itself as a mechanism of control and exploitation. Yes, it maintains quality standards. Yes, it provides some structure and protection. But primarily, it exists to extract maximum value from craftsmen's labor while limiting their options and mobility. The masters benefit. The wealthy clients benefit. The apprentices and journeymen provide the labor that makes it all possible while receiving the smallest share of the value they create. You're starting to understand why some craftsmen drink heavily, why anger and resignation sit so close together in the workshop, why the older journeymen have a kind of deadness in their eyes, going through motions they've repeated 10,000 times, creating beauty mechanically because the wonder wore off years ago and what remains is just the grind. You're not there yet, but you can see it approaching, the slow death of enthusiasm replaced by routine and resentment. There's a particular bitterness to creating luxury goods for the wealthy while living in relative poverty yourself. You're making goblets that cost more than you earn in months. You're creating decorative vessels that exist solely for display, objects whose only function is to demonstrate wealth. And you're doing this while wearing clothes that are singed and stained, while eating simple food, while living in a cramped space attached to the workshop because you can't afford anything better. The beauty you create is real, though. That's the complicated part. Despite everything, the exploitation, the danger, the damage to your body, you're making objects that are genuinely beautiful and will outlast you by centuries. There's meaning in that, or at least you tell yourself there is. The goblet won't remember you, but it will carry forward the evidence of human skill and creativity. Somehow that has to matter, or else what's the point of any of this suffering? You've developed a relationship with glass that's almost emotional. You understand it now in ways you didn't at the beginning, how it wants to flow, how temperature affects its behavior, how it responds to pressure and breath and heat. You can feel through the blowpipe what's happening with the glass on the other end. You've internalized rhythms and techniques that are almost instinctive now. This knowledge cost you a year of your life and permanent damage to your body. But it's real knowledge, real skill, and no one can take it from you. Except they can, in a way. If you're injured badly enough that you can't work, the knowledge is useless. If your lungs deteriorate enough that you can't blow glass anymore, the skill becomes irrelevant. If you die young, which is likely, everything you learn dies with you unless you pass it to apprentices who are themselves temporary vessels for knowledge that will outlive them all. The craft persists through generations of craftsmen who don't. Your eyesight is starting to suffer too. The constant exposure to bright furnace light, the strain of working in dim conditions, the repeated minor injuries to your eyes from smoke and particles, it's all accumulating. You squint more than you used to. Details that should be sharp are slightly fuzzy. The masters all have eye problems. It's just part of the profession. Another cost, another piece of yourself traded for the craft. The master's daughter sometimes comes into the workshop to bring messages or meals. She's 14, and she looks at you and the other apprentices with a mixture of pity and something else you can't quite identify. She understands that you're giving up your health for her family's prosperity. She's not unkind, but she also knows that this is how the system works. Her comfortable life is built on your labor and sacrifice. She didn't create this system, but she benefits from it, and that dynamic sits uncomfortably between you in the few moments when you interact. There are moments of genuine satisfaction, though, when a difficult piece comes out perfectly, when you master a new technique, when the glass cooperates and your vision becomes reality. These moments are real and valuable, and they sustain you through the misery. The problem is that they're becoming less frequent as the work becomes routine. What was magical 12 months ago is now just another day's labor. The wonder fades and what's left is the grind. You think sometimes about the hands that will hold the goblet you made. Will they appreciate it? Will they notice the evenness of the walls, the careful shaping of the stem? Probably not. It will be one object among many, notable only when it breaks and needs replacing. The aristocratic hand holding it will be soft, uncalloused, unmarked by labor. Your scarred, burned hands made it possible for those soft hands to hold something beautiful. There's an irony in that, though you're too tired most days to find it particularly amusing. The workshop feels different now than it did a year ago. You're no longer the newest apprentice. Someone else arrived 3 months ago, younger and more scared than you were, and now you're passing on knowledge the way others passed it to you. You watch this kid make the same mistakes you made, burn himself the same ways, struggle with the same techniques. It's a cycle, endlessly repeating. Apprentices becoming journeymen, becoming masters. Each generation teaching the next, everyone paying the same costs. Your dreams have changed. You used to dream about mastering the craft, becoming renowned, creating masterpieces. Now you dream more modestly, about having your own small workshop someday, about earning enough to be comfortable, about surviving long enough to see those dreams realized. The ambitions have narrowed as reality has set in. You've seen how few apprentices make it to master status. You've seen how many wash out, injured or sick or simply unable to continue. You've seen how the successful ones sacrifice everything else. Health, family time, any life outside the workshop, for their craft. But you're still here, still gathering molten glass, still blowing bubbles into the heat, still creating these fragile, perfect things that will outlast you. There's a stubbornness in that, or maybe just a lack of alternatives. You've invested too much to quit now. Your family's money, your own time, the damage already done to your body. Walking away would mean all of that was wasted. So you continue, knowing that every day further commits you to this path, knowing that the costs will keep accumulating, knowing that the goblets you make today will still exist long after you're buried and forgotten. The glass glows in the furnace, honey gold and hypnotic, waiting for you to gather it and shape it into something beautiful. Your lungs ache, your hands hurt, your body is tired in ways that sleep doesn't fully fix anymore. But the glass doesn't care about any of that. It just waits, patient and eternal, ready to be transformed by whoever has the skill and the willingness to pay the price. And that's you now, for better or worse. You're a glassblower with everything that means. The skill and the beauty and the damage and the invisibility and the stubborn pride that keeps you coming back despite everything. You pick up the blowpipe. The metal is warm already, heated by proximity to the furnace. You move toward the crucible, toward the molten glass that's been waiting since sand and fire first met, toward another day of creating beauty that will carry no trace of you except in the quality that no one will think to attribute to the scarred hands that shaped it. Tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after that, and all the days that follow, until your body gives out or the glass finally releases you from its seductive, destructive beauty. For now, though, you gather, you rotate, you blow, and the glass becomes something it wasn't before, shaped by breath and fire and knowledge that cost you everything you didn't know you'd have to pay. The workshop sounds are fading now in your mind, the roar of the furnace softening to a gentle hum, like a memory of heat rather than heat itself. The glass you've blown catches the last light of evening, glowing softer, cooling into permanence. Your hands, scarred and weary, finally rest. The rhythm of your breath slows, deep and steady, no longer fighting against smoke and heat. You've made it through another day in this medieval world, witnessed the beauty and the cost, and now it's time to let it all settle into the quiet darkness. The glass will be there tomorrow, waiting patient as always, but tonight belongs to rest. Close your eyes. Let the warmth of accomplishment, not furnace fire, surround you. You survived a day that few could endure, learned secrets that shaped centuries, and created something beautiful despite everything. That's enough for now. The workshop fades. The past releases you gently. Sleep well, knowing you've touched something timeless, even if only in these drowsy moments between waking and dreaming. Sweet dreams.